If the horror stories are to be believed, Dark Souls is a punishing game that only those with infinite patience will ever see the end of. As with so many legends, there's a grain of truth to these claims that's been exaggerated out of proportion. Yes, Dark Souls is a merciless beast whose demanding nature will put off a lot of people. But is it insurmountable for the average gaming enthusiast? I'd argue no. After a cryptic intro that raises more questions than it answers, Dark Souls places you in a prison cell armed with only a broken sword. On top of that, your character died before you even had a say in their life. All this sets the tone for an adventure that pulls no punches, and by the time you find a decent weapon, you will have already run into some lethal creatures. But there's nothing inherently unreasonable about the opening segment of gameplay. You're told which buttons do what, then given a weapon and left to figure out the most efficient means of killing stuff with it. The result is a game that trains you to approach new areas with caution, never underestimate an opponent, and always have an escape route if things go tits up. It's an intriguing hybrid of old and new game design, sans most of the cryptic bollocks our nostalgia doesn't let us remember. The combat is the dominant gameplay feature, and I don't hesitate to call it some of the best I've ever seen. A dagger feels completely different from a giant hammer, and neither can be called definitively better than the other. Dodging attacks and getting backstabs is a reliable tactic, but so is tanking damage and punching through blocks with heavy weapons, not to mention the abundance of magical weapons that honestly I find too confusing, even all these years later. It's a strategic experience that something like Skyrim, for all its charm, can barely dream of. Speaking of strategy, Dark Souls is one of the precious few games that actually give severe penalties for death. Every time you die, you lose your accumulated XP and have precisely one chance to retrieve them. If you cock that up, the XP is gone forever. It's harsh, to be sure, but checkpoints are never obscenely far apart, and I learned early on that if you know your downfall is imminent, you might as well try to die in a spot that can be reached easily. It's just another system to exploit, and will only screw you over if you push your luck. Know when to retreat and spend your experience, rather than lose them deep in enemy territory. That the entire world respawns when you use a checkpoint seems bizarre at first, but makes a lot of sense to me. Sitting at a bonfire becomes a tactical decision, since it provides safety at the cost of undoing your progress in the level. And as crushing as it is to lose your hard-earned XP, those moments are also the best times to throw yourself at a boss or speed through a tough area to grab items, since you don't lose items when you die. Navigating the Metroidvania landscape is the other great art of Dark Souls. Locales are varied, along with their inhabitants, and frequently bigger than they first appear, overflowing with hidden loot, shortcuts, and even optional bosses. Backtracking does become a nuisance beyond a certain point, and the teleport option is hard-earned, but the only places I truly dislike are the handful suffering from framerate problems, on the older versions of consoles, I should say, and finicky platform segments. Other than that, I find the game's setup enjoyable, not least due to its role in one of Dark Souls' most surprising triumphs, world building. There's a wealth of lore to be found in subtle background details and item descriptions, and it really felt like I was piecing together the world's history from the clues left behind. The slow realization of just how boned everything is fits perfectly with the sense of dread pervading the gameplay, and even your character's ability to rise after death is contextually justified. For a game that could have relied solely on its combat, I found it doubly impressive that Dark Souls manages to have a memorable world, and with a minimalistic style that's refreshing in an industry whose attempts at storytelling are often about as subtle as a hammer to the face. Another remarkable aspect of Dark Souls is the online integration, which inherited from an older game called Demon Souls. Players can leave messages that randomly pop up in people's worlds. Some are helpful, some are amusing, and some are outright lies. Then you have a clunky but workable co-op mechanic, along with the danger of being invaded by other adventurers whenever you de-zombify yourself. The whole arrangement is seemingly unique to the Souls franchise and has created a profound sense of community while also reminding you that nobody can be fucking trusted. At its core, Dark Souls represents a raw but fair challenge where death is almost never anyone's fault but your own. And while your initial perception may be one of cruel chaos, dig deep enough and you'll find a sense of order. Even as someone who wasn't able to beat the game the first time without help, I absolutely consider Dark Souls to be a classic, and you can see its influence throughout the industry in the years since it came out. The only question, if you haven't tried it, is whether you'll enjoy an action game which requires you to be methodical and treat every fight like a matter of life and death. Don't pay attention to the more toxic subsets of the fan base. It's entirely possible not to like something for reasons other than sucking at it. You do not have to get good at Dark Souls if you don't feel like it.